Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 110. Yeah, 110. And what is being picked for this particular episode and what's being spotlighted this week for, of course, album of the week here on this channel? Well, if you had seen episode number 109, which was, of course, focused on Difficult to Cure from Rainbow, at the end of that episode, I did announce what was going to be this week's, or at least this episode's, for here, number 110, was going to be the album. It is the 14th studio album from Anvil. Yes, now the second Anvil album here being spotlighted on this channel in another month a row here. Yeah, second time. Again, Juggernaut of Justice, which was originally released which was May 10th, 2011, through, of course, the labels such as either The End Records in the US, SPV Steamhammer in Germany, and Avalon in Japan. And, wow. 10 years, though. 10 years. Because I remember when this came out, because at this point, I was just, my God, I was definitely an Anvil mania. Because I really got heavily into them, at least in 2009 is when I really got heavily into Anvil. And this album was great. And this was, of course, the follow-up to, many ways, what was considered probably one of the best comeback albums. And I know some are kind of wondering about comeback, because of really, Anvil never really split up. But it was also, I guess the better word is like return to form, which was in the form of This Is 13, which had came out in 2007 independently until VH1 Records decided to reissue it in 2009, again, but with some bonus tracks and whatnot. And it definitely revived the band. And at that point, they became a three-piece again. I mean, while I haven't heard, who had been with the band for definitely some years, I mean, he was on Plenty of Power, which I did, again, that was the album I did spotlight on this channel. He at least had performed 3 tracks on This Is 13. Again, he had contributed guitar stuff to that, which were, of course, tracks such as, again, Burning Bridges, Route Number 9, and Big Business. But that was about it. They were just back to being a three-piece, or at least into being a three-piece. They began to be one. I shouldn't say they went back to being a three-piece. So not like they're a Motorhead. They were a 4-piece band, but they went to being a trio, which again, it was just down to the members such as Steve Lips, Kudo, Glenn Five, and then Rob Reiner. And so this is, of course, the second album of Anvil as now a 3-piece band, Juggernaut of Justice. And so this album right here was being recorded at least sometime, it had to have been sometime in like 2010. It's not really specified on when or what were the years or the months that this album was being recorded, but at least it was being recorded at, of course, Studio 606 and the Blue Room Studios in Los Angeles, California, United States. And, of course, all being produced by Bob Marlett, who, of course, had worked with plenty of artists such as Rob Zombie, Ozzy Osbourne, and Airborne, just to really name a few there. So, and of course, again, This Is 13 saw, of course, the late, great Chris Sangarides back to producing the band, because of, if you had seen the documentary, which was This Is Anvil, I believe it was titled, Libs definitely went into a lot of, in his opinion, he felt that the last time any of their albums sounded really good was when Chris Sangarides had produced some basically Metal on Metal and Fortune Fire. He said those were some of the best sounding in terms of sonically and the production. They just sounded, and afterwards, just everything kind of completely went into, it just, to him, it felt like, while I think the albums weren't really bad, it's just that he just wished they sounded great. And because, again, money. Money is always going to be the crutch and everything, because of it. It's just it's for some, money is always going to be a big factor, because you actually have to have money to actually purchase or even offer to getting a more big production, to hire a producer, studio time. You have to have the best sort of money to at least to offer to get that sort of best sound. And I know some say, well, money shouldn't always count. Sorry. If you want something to sound great, you need to get a good producer. Though nowadays, with all technology, you can now make anything sound good with the fucking Pro Tools or WavePad or Audacity, whatever, on your computer, just in the room of your bedroom, and they offer all the equipment basically to record this shit. So you can be able to actually make things sound pretty decent. But sometimes if you had a good professional engineer and producer, well, you know what? Everything it always makes a pretty big difference in many ways. But Anvil, obviously, they were financially pretty in a rough spot financially, so they couldn't. But he always said, and during that documentary, the best sound that had ever sounded great was when Chris Singerides was producing for him, Metal and Forge and Fire. So when it came to finally to getting all this kind of money back, and of course doing the I think they did do like a crowdfunding, I believe. I can't remember, but I think This Is 13 might have been crowdfunded. Fact check me if you want in the comment section. You can fact check me on that. But I think it did, because they wanted to at least be able to get the money to actually, so they can be able to get back Chris Singerides to produce, and eventually that's what ended up happening. Everything came through, and This Is 13 pretty much served to be the album that resurrected the popularity or the relevancy of Anvil. It actually, it really turned their career around. After so many years busting their ass to get back to being where they should have been after Forge and Fire, that album was, some will say it was too late, but I think it was probably the perfect time, because of, at that point, a lot of bands were starting to get back together. Even more obscure bands was beginning to get back together. So it was almost, in many ways, in hindsight, it was actually good timing. So they did it. And right in the 2010s, Anvil kind of pretty much, they pretty much thrived, I would say, during all of the 2010s. They really, their career really went around. I mean, sure, they're not opening up a lot of big stadiums. I mean, when This Is 13 came out, the last time they actually opened up for any big bands was AC/DC. And that was the last time they actually played at any sort of big arenas, besides going back to Japan to then play one of their festivals in front of that many people. But the last time that any sort of big band took them on tour was AC/DC, again, around This Is 13. So you kind of get where this is all going. So finally, we're finally getting into, of course, again, 4 years later, after This Is 13, even though This Is 13 was reissued in 2009, that's when I kind of purchased This Is 13, was again at a Walmart. It's the only Anvil album that they had, and I was really getting into them. So I decided to check out that one, and I loved This Is 13. I thought it was a great record. I thought it was good. And so when Juggernaut of Justice was coming out, I was really excited for this album. This would, again, I was really excited because I loved This Is 13. And finally, they were, I guess in many ways, let's just head into Juggernaut of Justice from Anvil, the 14th studio album from them. All right. So, Juggernaut of Justice from Anvil. So, again, being released on May 10th, 2011 through many of its labels. Again, the first studio album to be produced by Bob Marlett. We got for at least the regular editions of this album, there are at least 12 songs. But then, of course, for the special editions for this album, there ended up being 14 songs. But then for, of course, like the Japanese and iTunes versions of the album, it ends up containing 15, because there's like an extra fucking track that's added in. And so I'll definitely elaborate on some of these songs. So, let's just begin with the original 12 here. So these original 12 songs, for at least the original editions, pretty much contain the title track opening up the album, When Hell Breaks Loose, New Orleans Voodoo, On Fire, fucking A, Turn It Up, This Ride, Not Afraid, Conspiracy, Running, Paranormal, and Swing Thing. Now, for the special edition of this album, the 2 bonus tracks being track 13 and 14 are The Station and Tonight Is Coming. And then, of course, for the Japanese and iTunes versions of this album, track number 15, again, it only reaches up to 15. It would be, the song would be called What I Want to Be. It's not a very easy track to come by. So, there you go. Those are pretty much all 15 of the songs for this album. And then pretty much, depending on these, for the regular edition, it would at least clock in at 44 minutes and 58 seconds. Whereas for the special edition of this album, because of those 2 additional songs, the timing of the album gets bumped up to about 52 minutes and 7 seconds. Now, whereas for the Japanese and iTunes version of this album, again, containing 15 songs, again, with the 15 track being What I Want to Be, the timing for this album, at least for the time length, gets bumped up a bit after that. I think it's almost like close to, let me see real quick, I think it's like 55 minutes, I believe. Let me look here real quick. Let's get this up here. Yeah, 55 minutes and 37 seconds, so there you go. There's the timing for the album. If you got the Japanese pressing of this album, or you had at least got it through iTunes, that would be the time length for that version of the album. So it just, again, it bumps up the length. Either way, it still is an album, and it still sounds really good. So let's definitely begin with my thoughts on this album when it came out. Because again, I loved This Is 13 so much. When this came out, I think at the time, I was absolutely jaw-dropped. I couldn't, it's like I thought they wouldn't at least top This Is 13, but I think they managed a way to top it, and still, whenever I listen to this album, I'm actually surprised how fucking good this is. And I love some of the albums that came out after this one, especially being Anvil as Anvil, Pounding the Pavement, and I do somewhat kind of like Legal at Last. But I would say my 2 favorite albums past this album, again, would be Anvil as Anvil and Pounding the Pavement. But this album is just really, some of the, again, of the more post-2000s, or This Is 13, this album is up there as probably as some of the best. I would say this album, or Pounding the Pavement, and Anvil as Anvil would be my rankings for some of these 3, because of this album is good. This was a really strong album from them. This is probably the most straight up. When they released an album titled Back to Basics, on that album, they weren't lying. They definitely were going back to basics after so many years trying to kind of stay relevant, which is also in terms of trying to... I've seen a lot of people say that they made the same album over and over again, but if you go back and listen to really some of those albums from the 1990s, musically, they were much more, they really kind of took a lot of inspiration from whatever Pantera or Slayer were kind of doing, or even their countryman Razor, in terms of just updating a little bit of their sound, and Lips definitely somewhat tuned down a little bit of his guitar to where it really kind of made it a little heavier. It was definitely updating it for the 90s. It still had that sort of Anvil sound at heart, but he really kind of made it to where it was more, I guess, accessible for the 1990s. It was much more angrier and more pissed off in some cases. So it didn't really have that sort of classic sound of like either albums like Hard and Heavy, Metal on Metal, and Forged in Fire, or even Strength of Steel to some matter. I mean, they were beginning to really combine with the sort of heaviness with Pound for Pound. Worth the Wait, I think, was probably the last one where it really had that classic, straight up early sort of 80s Anvil sound. But you can definitely tell they were starting to go in a bit more of a much more heavier direction in the 1990s. But with an album like Juggernaut of Justice, and then of course Back to Basics, and This Is 13, they really began to go back to basics. They were going back to their original sound and making sort of albums that at times almost retain that sort of youthful classic sound of, for sure, of albums like Hard and Heavy, Metal on Metal, and Forged in Fire, and maybe Strength of Steel, and of course maybe Pound for Pound, and in some cases Worth the Wait. They really wanted to combine all of those elements of those albums, but somehow try and freshening up for this generation. I think if anything, it kept them for, I hate, some are going to say, well, you're full of shit to say that they tried to make it sound fresh for the 2010s. Yes, I do feel they kind of did. In many ways, their whole career getting revived, it rejuvenated their ambitions a bit to really want to try and continue, and in many ways remind people what where they were from, remind them who they are. So I think an album like Juggernaut of Justice really rejuvenated that, and it really it set the tone. It made everyone again realize who they were from the beginning they formed. And I think they did a good job. I mean, it opens up with Juggernaut of Justice, which is a straight up headbanger. It's a fucking great, with plenty of hooks. That's the one thing about this album, is it's got hooks. I mean, from the title track to When Hell Breaks Loose, On Fire, fucking A, Turn It Up, This Ride, Not Afraid, even Conspiracy's got a real good fucking heavy riff to it. It almost reminds me a little bit of the track You're a Liar, which was actually an outtake from the Metal on Metal album, but didn't get released until the Backwaxed album in 1985. But the riffing to Conspiracy sounds very similar to that. It's just that I think the scales have been kind of changed a little bit because of it. They're using a more a bit of a slightly different scale, but the sort of the riff pacing and the way it's still played is very similar to You're a Liar off of Backwaxed. So it definitely has a similar sort of riff to it. It's just a little played differently in a way, but it still kind of reminds me of it. And of course, Running, and then of course in terms of some of the bonus tracks, like The Station and Tonight Is Coming, are also great tracks. Even the Japanese or iTunes bonus track, What I Want to Be, is also good. But you still have plenty of uniqueness. They still change up a lot of things, especially on songs like New Orleans Voodoo and the track Paranormal, and then Swing Thing, and then even This Ride, where some of these songs, they really they definitely experiment with their sound a little bit here. They definitely kind of start, they're tweaking a little bit to make things a little bit more interesting. New Orleans Voodoo is, again, it begins with Glenn Five's sort of very almost phasey, psychedelic bass sort of tone and his riff, and when it goes into the track, it's a heavy song. It's a good fucking track. This Ride is, again, it's more of a, I wouldn't say power metal, but it really pushes that. But the thing that is so interesting about this one is it actually brings in a little bit of a more like organs, Hammond organ sound going on with this one, which kind of gives it a little bit of a Deep Purple or Uriah Heep sort of feel going on with this Ride. And there's even, I think, a straight up actual or Hammond organ or solo, keyboard solo and the track, and then of course Lip's guitar solo. It's really cool and interesting. Eventually the Rods kind of went with this, tried to tweak with this sound as well on their most recent album. But I think Anvil tried this and it was very good. Paranormal is very interesting. This one is probably the longest song, I think. Actually, no, it's not the longest song Anvil might have recorded, but it's kind of going back to sort of feel like Worth the Wait here. This is where I think I get a lot of the Worth the Wait feel with Paranormal. Again, this track here clocks in at 7 minutes and 4 seconds, but the way it begins, very haunting. It's got a sort of a spooky sort of atmosphere going on with the beginning of it, but when it goes into song, it's definitely more Black Sabbath-y in its feel, which again, they really began to kind of flirt with the sort of Black Sabbath style pacings and riff stuff and so on. They definitely were kind of flirting with that, but I think everything is executed very well on this one, and it really, again, and towards the end of the song, it picks up the pacing where it's fast, and it's just, again, oh my god, it's probably their way of their answer to probably trying to create a track that's similar to the song Black Sabbath from Black Sabbath. No, either way, it is a fucking good song. I do like it. Swing Thing, I mean, riff-wise, it's not that different from, let's say, a song, for example, like Jackhammer off of Metal on Metal, but they really began to sort of mix in sort of like swing or jazz kind of beats into the song. And of course, there's even, again, horns on this track as well. They actually add, which kind of give that sort of almost swingy, jazzy kind of upbeat sort of pacing to it again, where you got a little bit of a horn solo on this track, but again mixed in with the Lips' guitar soloing. It's really interesting. Again, they really began to experiment or just tweaking with their sound, and it was very interesting, and I think they did a pretty good job with it. So they found some ways to mix things up, but not to a point where it really changed up the sound. Like, for example, with Raven on, for example, albums like either The Pack Is Back or Stay Hard, which on Stay Hard, Raven pretty much kind of flirted with the track with horns. They did a similar thing with what Anvil was doing here, but I think Anvil executed it better. It's what I think Raven almost thought of. I think they had the right intentions when they probably came up with that sort of track. I forgot. I think it was The Bottom Line off of Stay Hard. They had a similar idea, but I think Anvil executed better here. So that's all I'm going on. So it's a very good track. Really, nothing's bad on here. This is probably the most solid, most consistent Anvil album to date. I think the reason why some of the albums afterwards have been so kind of hard, I think to kind of top some of this, even though I do like albums like Anvil is Anvil and Pounding the Pavement, and to an extent Legal is Last. Not a big fan of the album that precedes this one. After this one, Hope in Hell. But at the same time, you can almost tell that it's a little bit difficult to try and make an album that sounds nearly this inspired in a way. Because there's a lot of inspiration that was found in this album, and I think they didn't really kind of... They really didn't force down a lot of their political sort of opinions so much on this album. Everything is so consistent. I mean, you got a track like Paranormal, which is, again, really a change of pace in sort of the lyrical direction for their albums. In that category, they really changed it up a bit, instead of just being switched on, the environment, or what are they saying on fucking Fox News? It's great, and it's interesting, and at least Pounding the Pavement kind of deviated a little bit away from at least the political stuff, but they still found a way of going on and doing that, and adding those lyrics. And I think in some cases, like on Legal at Last, I think they really went so far with their political opinions that in some cases, I think it kind of it overrided a lot of the album's sort of at least somewhat goodness of it. It overrided a lot of those songs. But on here, everything's great, and Bob Marley, this is probably the best sort of, I think, album with Bob Marley on production. Everything sounds so crisp in a way. Everything just has a nice balance to it. Even if it is loud, it still has a nice balance, and it still has a warmth going on to it. It still is. It's a great album. He did a great job with them, so I can't say anything bad about it. So there we go. I guess to kind of make things short, this was a very strong album in my opinion from Anvil, and they definitely did it. But after this album, Glenn 5 will be out of the band. I guess things they just weren't seeing eye to eye. It came to a point where Glenn 5 just wasn't seeing eye to eye with at least Lips. So he pretty much left the band. I guess their Lips might say he fired him, but he left. And after this, they were on to looking for, of course, a new bass player, and that's where they found Sal Italiano of the band Cities to contribute to bass onto the next album after this one, which eventually I'll get to it, that being Hope in Hell, but whatever. That, of course, is the album that's after this one. So I'll just leave things there. So there we go. Juggernaut of Justice from Anvil, originally released on May 10th, 2011. So it's 10 years 10 years now, 10 years old for this one. So if you have any memories of this album, if you didn't care for it when it first came out, but you now have grown into this album, if you have any of those kind of thoughts, you can leave them in the comment section below. But if you have any thoughts on where you liked it when it came out, but now you don't really care much for it now, again, basically the reverse opinions or whatnot, again, you can leave them in the comment section below. But if you haven't heard this album, if you want at least a good taste of modern day Anvil, I think this is probably, this album or This Is 13, I think are great sort of introductions to the more modern period of Anvil. I think these are, to me, This Is 13, Juggernaut of Justice are definitely two of some of the best. But as far as personal opinions, if I'm going to throw in my own, I'll probably even throw in Pounding the Pavement, or maybe Anvil is Anvil, maybe, but again, that's only personally for me. But objectively, This Is 13 and Juggernaut of Justice are definitely two of some of the best I think Anvil definitely had offered as part of their sort of rejuvenated period of Anvil, where they really got back to being where they probably should have been years ago. So there we go. Again, great album. So that's it for this episode. Now, before I really end things even further, what's going to be next week's Album of the Week episode is a good one. Finally, since I had highlighted the album from 1980 already last year, it is going to be Shock Tactics from Samson, which of course will be the second and, in a way, final studio album with Bruce Dickinson on vocals for Samson, because I had already made a hard, not what was it? God damn it, Head On as a Album of the Week episode last year. So finally, I'll get to talk about Shock Tactics. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrash Head saying, I am out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.